Okay, well, I was asked recently what I thought about the statement made by Billie Eilish and how I could defend from a biblical standpoint what, you know, law enforcement or what ICE is doing. So, to first address that statement, um, what was it? No one is illegal on stolen land. Well, the statement, first of all, is actually historically inaccurate. I mean, this land, the United States, was purchased, it was settled, and it was conquered. It wasn't stolen. And, to be honest, truth be told, most of the land in the United States was actually purchased. But here's the thing. Um, all land, without exception, in the history of this entire planet, was at one time or another conquered or settled. I mean, even if you go back to a time before the Europeans came to the United States and stepped on, the land in North America, you got to think the Sioux conquered the Cheyennes, the Comanches conquered the Southern Plains Indians, and so on down the line. The only uniqueness in this matter with regard to the United States when it comes to this sort of thing is that, as far as my studies have found, the United States is the only country in the history of the world that has ever purchased any land. I mean, no other country has ever purchased any land at all that I know of. But the statement she made, of course, was supposed to be a stab at the current crackdown on illegal immigration in this country. So if the United States is so horrible for claiming ownership or residency, if you will, of a land that was conquered or settled and unique to the United States, even purchased nearly 350 years ago, then what does Miss Eilish and all those who agree with her rhetoric, what do they think about every other civilization on the planet? Because at one point, the Spanish crossed the Atlantic Ocean and conquered the Aztec Indians. And that's essentially the story of the entire country of what we would call current Mexico. And to the best of my knowledge, none of that was purchased. That was all conquered. So if she considers the United States to be stolen, what kind of a fancy word does she have for Mexico? Because I'm curious. And like I said, every other civilization in the world. Anyway, after she made that statement at this music award ceremony, whatever it was, she said her little stolen land statement. She followed that up by saying something to the effect of people matter and people's voices matter. Now, I don't really know what she was trying to get at by saying that part of her statement, but then she follows that up by saying F ICE. F ICE. And of course, that was followed up by, thunderous applause because, as we all know, right? Monkey see, monkey do, right? This is the sort of nonsense that Jesus referred to when he was talking about the blind leaders of the blind in Matthew 15:14. And where he eventually ends up saying that all of them are going to fall into a pit. Romans chapter 1 addresses why this sort of thing tends to happen, talking about the thunderous applause over her saying F ICE. First of all, the Bible's pretty clear that humans are just depraved anyway. And the world is full of folks who are just looking for reasons to be miserable and for things to complain about. And when you get a group of these type of people together, that attitude spreads like wildfire. But anyway, getting back to Romans chapter 1. In Romans chapter 1, Paul mentions that God eventually, when he's dealing with what the scriptures refer to as hard-hearted people, it says he gives them over to a debased mind, to uncleanness, to vile passions, In other words, their sins. He gives them over to their sins. And when we get to the end of Romans chapter 1, Paul wraps it up by listing multiple examples of the specific kinds of sins that people start feeling free to do when God gives them over to a debased mind. And then he says that even though they know they're being sinful, they do it anyway. And then he ends that by saying, even worse than that, they encourage others to do the same. So what am I getting at? Billie Eilish essentially received a standing ovation for telling folks not to obey the law. Now, I'm not defending everything that our law enforcement agencies and officers do, from one day to the next, from one week to the next. I'm not defending them everything they do by any means. But the Bible commands us to obey the governing authorities. And read Romans chapter 13 if you think I'm making that up, because I'm not. When we're in a society that's encouraging folks to break the law, cheering them on when they do, and turning them into martyrs when they receive their due justice, that's when we know that we're dealing with the spirit of Antichrist. So, if that answers your question of how I feel, what are my thoughts from a biblical standpoint about what she said, F ICE, everybody's on stolen land here. That's how I feel, and that's how the Bible feels.